Hello and welcome to What Lingers, the podcast where we uncover the questions behind people's stories. I'm Cristian Figueroa.
And I'm Liz Melchor, and we are the team behind Storytelling Lisboa, where once a month, 10 storytellers get on stage in front of 200 people and tell true and personal stories related to a theme.
It is always a great event, but there is a catch. We always have lingering questions for the storytellers and no format to ask them. Until now.
In this second season of What Lingers, we invite storytellers to revisit and listen back to their original story from that night, and then sit down with us for a conversation to uncover what lingers for us all.
Just a heads up, the recording of the story you will hear comes from the actual stage of Storytelling Lisboa, so the sound might be a little bit fuzzy.
Hi, Cristian.
Hi, Liz.
I'm so happy to see you. We're back.
Yes, I know. I miss you.
I know I miss you too. Okay, but today we have a really special storyteller, and I am so excited for this episode.
Why are you so excited about it?
Pot brownies.
Brownies.
Actually, I'm kidding. I don't like pot. I never liked pot ever, but I do like brownies.
Yeah, and this is an amazing story because it was for the Lies edition of this year. It's a fresh from the oven story. And yeah, it's about lies, about drugs, it's about also very tender, emotional family issues, which I always love.
Like family drama, I love it.
Family drama, I'm a Cancer.
No, I know, but that's the best thing about this story. Like, you think it's like a haha story, and then it's sort of at the end, you know. But I'm not going to spoil anything. Okay. Anyways, let's get into it with Skye's story for Lies.
I am standing in my white painter pants and boy's green t-shirt in the long kitchen of the Victorian house that my parents rented the second year after my father went bankrupt. And the warm spring air is redolent with the smell of chocolate and a little touch of herb, which is, of course, cannabis. So I open the oven and I take out the first tray of brownies and I put it on the top of the oven and I put the second tray in. Now, I'm just 16 years old, and about a month before, Sister Ann Raymond, the battle axe disciplinarian at the all-girls Catholic high school that I attend. Now, let's get real about this. It's probably about 2,999 girls and non-binary me. So Ann Raymond calls my parents in for a conference, as she does for the parents of all the students who are failing conduct, something I am spectacularly good at. And she sits my parents down and she does her thing, which is this long stare and then a pause. And she says, you know, your kid never lies. And I actually have never lied to Sister Ann Raymond. In fact, I enjoy telling her the truth because when I'm sent to her office, which is almost daily, I imitate the teachers and then me in our conflict with each other. And I've also taken a vow of honesty because at 16, I really don't want to be anything like my father, who has exaggerated so much, he has no idea what the truth is anymore. I don't quite see the contradiction, though, in going door to door, selling imaginary ads for a theater program when the play isn't happening, so that I can take the cash and buy the 3 ounces of pot that I'm using for the brownies. So back in the kitchen, I take the second tray of brownies out of the oven, put it on top, cut one, blow on it, start to eat it. I don't know, it's my second brownie, my third. I've lost track how many brownies I've eaten. And then I'm kind of tired of sifting the pod to get rid of the stems and the seeds. So for this third batch, I kind of half-ass shift it, take some of it out, dump the pod in, mix it, and throw the third batch in the oven. And just then, the back door opens, and I realize I have not timed this correctly, because Sister Nancy Lamey, the principal of my brothers and sisters' elementary school, I swear I'm not making this up, walks in the back door. She's also my mother's boss. So she's followed by my mother and two of my brothers and one of my sisters. And she inhales and she says, "Wow, that smells really good." And then she smiles at me because she likes me way more than my mother does. And then my brother reaches for a brownie and I swat his hand away. And then my sister reaches for a brownie and I take both of the trays and I get a big Tupperware and I start frantically putting the brownies in the Tupperware, and I'm looking over my shoulder at my mother because I know what's coming. And I turn and I say, "I need every single one of these for school." And my mother, who I'm a little afraid of on a good day, says, "One. Everyone can have just one." And what am I supposed to say? No, they can't, they're drugged? So I kind of stand there helplessly while everybody takes one brownie from the first, most potent batch. And they start eating the brownies as they are walking out of the room. And Sister Nancy and my mother are going to go into the living room and sit on the couch way too close, being very, very friendly, drinking white wine like they do every day, because I am not the only queer in my family. So then my father comes home. He's an ex-football player, so he has to have probably 2 brownies. And then Sister Nancy leaves the house to walk back to the convent with her veil hanging over one eyebrow. And we all sit down to dinner. Now, dinner in my family was typically my father came home late or drunk or both, and then my parents would fight, and my brothers and sisters would push at each other for who got to sit where and arguing about who got to eat what. But this night, everybody's quiet. And they are eating as much as they can, as fast as they can. And they all kind of wander away from the table and go upstairs, and everyone's asleep by 7 p.m. So I get up the next morning, and I take my huge Tupperware of brownies to school on the bus in my Catholic school uniform, and I'm sharing them with my friends. And we all eat a lot of brownies, like way too many brownies. By the time it gets to lunch, there's only 2 or 3 brownies left. And my head is so heavy, I can't hold it up anymore. So I have like an arm stretched on the long cafeteria table and my head just kind of hanging. And I see Sister Ann Raymond, the disciplinarian, out of the corner of my eye, open the doors and start to walk down the steps. And I stand up and I say, "Hey, sister, you want a brownie?" And my friends grab my uniform to pull me back into my chair, but it's too late. Ann Raymond is making a beeline for the table with her black habit swirling around her calves. And my friends are frantically trying to pull the stems and seeds out of these last couple brownies because they are from that terrible third batch. And when Ann Raymond gets to the table, I take the brownie that has been most operated on. And I say, "Would you like a brownie, sister?" And she takes it. She says, "I think I will, thank you." She takes a bite, and then she walks across the cafeteria and out the door. So the next day, I'm at school, and I'm walking down the hall, and I pass the discipline office. And Sister Ann Raymond sees me, and she calls my name. She walks out into the hall, and I say, "Hey, sister, how you doing?" She says, "Fine." You know, there's a rumor going around that there was something in those brownies. And I say, oh yeah? Well, you ate one, sister. Did you get high? And she says, no. Why would people be saying something like that if it's not true? And I said, yeah, probably because of my reputation, sister. And she says, well, maybe you should do something about that reputation. I say, nah, I kind of like it the way it is. And she shakes her head and walks away, and that's it. I was apparently very good with nuns. So much so that a year and a half later, when I quit smoking pot and I quit doing drugs and smoking cigarettes and drinking, Sister Ann Raymond helped me to promote myself to the college level classes at the high school, where I made honors. And then my parents kicked me out of the house. And she took me to live at the convent, first for 3 days, and then for the rest of the year. And when I graduated, she arranged for me to have a place to live for the summer so that I didn't have to go back to my family. And this is how I learned that it's not necessarily the lie that you get caught in that changes your life. It's the lie that you have to carry. Because I never told Sister Ann Raymond that there was something in those brownies. I was pretty sure she'd never forgive me if I did. But I did become more and more and more honest every year that I've been alive, because I wanted to love better. Especially I wanted to love better the person who had saved my life.
Aww.
And I wanted to make her proud.
Aww.
Thank you.
Skye, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and being here in What Lingers. It's such a joy to have you here. But before we actually begin, would you mind introducing yourself for everyone listening at home, please?
Sure. I'm Skye. My performance name is Skylar Learlin Kay, and I'm originally from outside of Boston.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could, because you do such a good job of setting the scene, and I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about what was going on right then. What year was it? How old were you exactly in the story? And you hint at your father being like a strong sort of peripheral character. He was exaggerating. He'd been bankrupt. And then your mother with her nun best friend on the couch, too close. And I'm just wondering if you could flesh it out a little bit more.
Sure. So it was 1976 and I was 16 years old. And my family, my adult life, I lived in New England, but I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. And when I was 14, my father went bankrupt and we moved to just outside of Philadelphia. And so what I'm referencing with my father, and I think I say he would either come home drunk or late or both. Yeah. My father's an alcoholic, and the bankruptcy, of course, had something to do with that. But it was a big upheaval and a big change for the family to move. And then my mother went to work. And Sister Nancy was not my mother's best friend. Sister Nancy was my mother's lover. I walked in on them kissing. And yeah, that's actually the very first story I ever told. And it's online. Like I told it at the Moth.
And had that already happened by the time this story had happened? Had you walked in on them?
This is like a sequel to that story in a way.
Oh, so this is it's not a secret. It's an open secret. Like you absolutely are 100% certain that they are lovers.
By the time I'm 16, I have walked in on them kissing. By the next year, Sister Nancy started spending the weekends my parents bought a house, and Sister Nancy and my mother slept in the bedroom upstairs. My father slept in the den downstairs. That was pretty hard to say. Of course, it's the love that cannot speak its name. They were just friends as long as my father was living in the house.
Absolutely. Oh, this is a lot. My jaw would just drop.
I know. That's the story. I feel like, yeah, my mother had an affair with a nun for 10 years. You can never beat that. Like nothing I do in my life. How can it be more interesting than that?
No, it is. It is. And she had the affair like basically in plain sight. And your father, he knew but didn't know, or?
Oh, he knew. When I was in my early 20s, he said some things to me that he knew. I mean, it wasn't even hinting, but it was totally inappropriate. So I don't like repeating it. But yeah, he knew that. I think that like my mother was so good at, when you talk about the way that I lied in this story, it was not an overt lie. I didn't say, Sister Ann Raymond, there was nothing in those brownies. I obfuscated and got out of it. So I didn't overtly lie, but it was still a lie. And my mother was just so amazing. This is not, I admire it and I don't, but she was so good at just acting like what was real wasn't real, and people let her get away with it. So for 7 or 8 of the 10 years that Nancy and my mother had this relationship, they worked together every day. They came to our house after work. They talked on the phone at night. They spent every weekend together. They went on vacations together. And the whole parish acted like they were just friends. And then when my mother kicked my father out of the house, that didn't fly anymore.
Oh, so then the friendship was just not acceptable. Right. Because then people were faced with having to deal with the actual reality.
And no, then nobody could pretend anymore.
Yeah, that's like this interesting thing. I was thinking about that in terms of your story a little bit, where it's like all these people, Sister Nancy comes in and she smells it and she's, oh, that smells so good. And then Sister Ann Raymond were there drugs in the brownies? And I just kept thinking of it, come on, these people, some of them know. Like when you're a kid, or like when I was a kid and I would smoke my cigarettes and stuff, I thought nobody knew that I smoked cigarettes, which is like absurd because now that I'm an adult, I'm like, oh yeah, like they could smell it on me. Like they knew everything. It's like you choose to acknowledge some realities because if you choose not to, you don't have to deal.
We have to think about, let's say that Sister Ann Raymond had been like, there had to be something in those brownies, right? She would have had to call the cops, kick me out of school. She would have had to ruin my life. And she really liked me. She believed what she needed to believe to not have to harm me. Yeah. And the same with my mother and Sister Nancy getting away with that. Everybody wanted to pretend that the lie was the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were mentioning about Sister Ann Raymond calling your parents to tell them that you are this troublemaker, and I can tell by the end, of course, we all tell that this person really has an appreciation for you. I can relate to this relationship of power of someone who is supposed to be taking care of you as a director or a conduct person, but she also sees your potential probably. And that's what she saw in you, even beyond the troublemaking and beyond the behaviors. She knew probably who you were going to be if you had the chance.
Yeah, I don't say it in this story. And at that point in time, she was calling in the parents of any student who was failing conduct and who was trouble. And she kicked most of them out. Most of them were expelled and they left that school.
Oh, wow.
And there were 2 things about me that I think that made me different, or maybe 3. First was I really had never lied to her. And also I was funny. Like I made her laugh when I would do these imitations of what was happening. She would be hiding her mouth behind her hand because she wasn't allowed to laugh and she was laughing. Yeah. And then they had at that time these tests. They were called the Iowa Basic Skills Tests. So every year they would test every student, but would test all your skills across all the subjects. And I had a nearly perfect score.
Oh, okay.
So I was also smart. And so those 3 things together, I was the one she chose to keep in the school.
And so you were really acting up, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like you were a bad kid.
Yeah. I mean, she was. So before, this was like my minor acting out the very first year. We had gym and we couldn't take showers. So everybody had these big things of talcum powder. And in the final class, we had this nun who was maybe in her 70s or 80s. And she didn't see very well, and she probably should have already been retired. And I don't know why. I was with my friends. We were fooling around. And so I was crawling around on the floor during class because she couldn't see me with my talcum powder going up to my friends and throwing the talcum powder, like on my hands and knees, going around the class doing that. And eventually there were these clouds of talcum powder, and the nun realized, and she said, "Who did this?" And she said, "We will not have class." And she went and got Ann Raymond, and Ann Raymond came down to the classroom and said, "Who did this? I'm going to go sit in my office, and whoever did this needs to come." And I walked in, and I did things like that all the time.
And looking back on it now, like now with time and reflection, why do you think you were acting up so much at that time in your life?
You know, I'm very interested in psychology and development and healing. And so I thought about it a lot. And if you have been badly treated, abused, or neglected as a child, and all of those things were true for me, when you hit puberty, you get angry. Like you get a surge of rage. And people do different things with that. But it was like a geyser. I was so angry. And I was angry at the unfairness. And I was angry at authority. So I made the authority figures in my life pay for what had happened to me. And I would say I did it with this sense of humor and this mischief. Like when I tell the stories are all funny. I wasn't going into school with a knife. I was throwing talcum powder. I was playing bumper cars with the trash cans in the cafeteria. It was all the stuff that comedic artist would do.
Yeah, it's like you're being a clown, just pushing the boundaries of what's allowed. And yeah.
Thank you for being honest and vulnerable on stage and here with us, because indeed, I do feel like the anger, it's such a common trait as the lies in the queer community. We have to suppress so much things, and that becomes something at any point of our lives. Would you mind if planning or just going a little bit deeper, what was that phase of your life when your parents kicked you out of the house?
I want to say one thing about anger, just to put a button on that. I believe that anger is life. And so when we talk about being queer, and my anger eventually became activism and it became art.
Totally.
And I don't feel like I'm a person who's possessed by rage, but I'm probably going to be angry for the rest of my life. I'm really angry at the oppression of non-binary and trans and queer people in the United States right now. Mm-hmm. And it's always, what can I do to fight it? So it's life. It's saying I exist. I have a right. That's why I'm angry. And there's nothing wrong with being angry. Being angry can save your life. In terms of my family, I would say, there was a lot of addiction, and there was abuse and neglect. And those things happen because my parents were broken. Mm-hmm. They were two damaged people who found each other and then made each other worse. And they didn't treat I'm one of 6. They didn't treat any of us well. Although I was the scapegoat, and I'm the oldest. Okay. And I was more dramatic with my rebellion than anybody else. But I think that what happened at the point when I started rebelling, I could no longer be controlled. Mm-hmm. It's a natural stage of life when you become a teenager to start saying no and differentiating. And my parents didn't want me to differentiate. And also their marriage was in shambles. My mother's having an affair with a nun. My father's been bankrupt. He's out drinking all the time, and they're fighting late at night and all the time. And so I went to Sister Ann Raymond and said, I need to promote myself. I'm bored. And I also knew that my high school career, which included failing conduct and failing classes, was not setting me up for a future. And I wanted to change that. So I went and...
So this came from you? This didn't came from Ann Raymond?
It came from me, and then she helped me.
Oh, wow.
It was a big drama, believe me, in that school, because it made myself so notorious as like the bad kid that it was like druggie turned genius. Nobody saw it coming. But what it did is it put the spotlight on the problems in my family, right? Because if I'm able to do this, then I'm not the problem. Mm-hmm. As long as I was acting out, I was the problem. You could point the finger at me. So my parents, and particularly my mother, hated that they looked bad.
Yeah.
And so when they kicked me out of the house the first time, it was at like 11 o'clock at night. And I hitchhiked to a friend's house. I stayed overnight at his house. And then it was like, do I skip school? I don't have my uniform. You have to wear a uniform to Catholic school. If I go in my regular clothes, the problem is right there. Everybody can see it.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I am not going to skip school so that my parents can say, see, Skye's still the problem. Skye skipped school, right? So there was this chess match between me and my parents. And I went to school without my uniform. And I had already promoted myself to the college level classes. Anne Raymond had helped me. I had made honors, which vindicated her belief in me in so many ways. And she said to me, why don't you have your uniform? And she expected a comedy routine, and I didn't have it.
Interesting.
And I just said, can we just not talk about this and you let me go to class? And she said, no, you need to tell me. And I told her what had happened, because there was violence around them throwing me out of the house. And she said to me, you can't live in sin and go to school here. I'm like, he's a friend. What am I going to say? I'm queer. I'm like, he's a friend. And she said, and the Lord has seen fit to open a bedroom at the convent for you to come stay in with us. And I was like, I said to her, sister, those nuns are going to kill me. For what I did for the last 3 years, you can't bring me to the convent. And she said, I'll talk to them.
Oh, wow.
And I was struck in the story how you said, I think you said, I became an honor student and then my parents kicked me out of the house. And it's like this sort of like juxtaposition, because you think, oh, you're such a bad kid, they're going to kick you out. But it's like you had been on this upward track, but now it makes sense in how you've explained it. And you mentioned that you got sober. And as somebody who's been sober for 16 years, since I was like 26, I'm always amazed by people who are able to get sober so young. And then, but also, how did you decide to do that? Or how did you get there?
Yeah, I will say that I worked at a fast food restaurant. Most of my friends were much older than I was, and they had already graduated high school. They had houses. So I used to go to bars with them and I would go to their parties. And at this grain alcohol party, I had a blackout. I don't remember most of the night, but I knew enough that some bad stuff had gone down, and I woke the next morning. And then later that day, I thought, I'm tired.
Wow.
I'm tired of making them look good. I'm tired of ruining my life for these people. I'm done. And I think the next week I went in and asked for the waivers to promote myself.
Wow. So somehow in that moment, you were able to understand that all of this acting out and all of this sort of like self-destruction, wasn't worth it, or wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny, because I have to say that rebellion, it was so fun. It was so fun. And yes, it was self-destructive, and it was also self-assertion. So it was this dual-edged sword. And I think it was one of the times in my life where I had a moment of utter clarity that there was nothing wrong with me. There was something wrong and I didn't want to pay the price for what was wrong with them anymore.
Oh, guys, I'm just beyond emotions listening to your story. And story also mentioning that there were like tons of girls at this Catholic school and the non-binary one, which was yourself. Were you already at this age aware of this, like your gender?
Yeah, there were 3,000 students altogether, 1,200 in my class.
Huge.
And then the boys' school was in a separate building on the same campus.
Okay.
So I'm sure there were other non-binary people, but what I would say is, of course, I did not have language in 1976 for being non-binary. I was aware that I was gender different from the time I was born. It was really clear in that we still use the language of tomboy.
Yeah.
And not every tomboy is non-binary. Sometimes you would use that word for a straight girl who is very athletic. But I was an extreme tomboy. And not only was I athletic, I played American football with all the boys, and I was better at it than the boys were. Partly the anger when I was little. Football was a place where I could, it was tackle football. I could tackle people and block people, and I had a lot of energy for that. But I also was completely incapable of relating in the ways that women are socialized to relate. So I just didn't care about the male gaze. I was immune to it, which actually made me, when I was little, I was bullied because I just couldn't figure out how to socially act right. I just didn't care what the boys thought. And so I act like it was such a relief to go to an all-girls school, because in an environment without people assigned male at birth, you can compete for grades. You don't have to hide how smart you are. You don't have to be demure. I always showed how smart I was. I always did those things. And it was just very clear to me that I was really different. And difference is a thing when we talk about being other. There's the queerness being other, and then there's being an abused child being other. And I had all these layers of other. And so I knew that I was different in multiple ways. And the gender piece of it, I tried to be more feminine. And I had my sister who's 3.5 years younger than I. We were very close for a long time. Very feminine, party girl, flirt, like all the boys loved her. And I could wear the same clothes, but I was never going to be able to relate the way that she could relate. I just could not do it. And I eventually came to understand that there's a way. I have a speech I gave at my Unitarian church in Beverly about how being non-binary and queer saved my life.
Okay.
Because my sister is still an active addict, has spent her life trying to please men, has trouble having female friendships because she's so focused on the male gaze. And I got into recovery. I became a wildly active feminist. I organized protests, and I got to claim my power because I was really never that good at giving it up. And I believe that there's a thing people say for people who are cisgendered. Nobody's as cisgendered as they think they are. Nobody's as heterosexual as they think they are. This is programming and conditioning. Mm-hmm. And the thing that non-binary and people and queer people have to offer is a door open to the freedom of finding the true expression of who you are, even if you're closer to the social construct. And I'm a person, you show me a door, I'm going to bust it open.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that to the conversation. I was wondering, when you mentioned your sister, how's your relationship with your other brothers that also were brought up in this environment that, as you mentioned before, is abusive and is neglected? How is your relationship with them?
Yeah. So growing up, with the exception, I have it's called an Irish twin. So my brother, who's closest to me in age, is 13 months younger.
Okay.
Impressive.
Yeah. If you do the math, my mother gave birth and got pregnant, right?
Yeah.
With the exception of him, the other 4, I was their parent.
Yes.
And I protected them when I could, and I nurtured them, and I listened to them. I cared about them. When they had nightmares, they came to my bed. They didn't go to my parents. For growing up, there wasn't a lot of, I have a thing about what really is love, and love is a practice. It's not just an emotion. Mm-hmm. And I got to experience love with my brothers and sisters that I didn't get with my parents. They just weren't capable. Yeah. That was really great. That was the growing up dynamic. And I was I think that if they complained about anything, I was judgmental in a way. I wanted them to go to college. I would pressure them to do better, like a typical oldest child, but in many ways with the Pop Brownies, not so typical. And then there was a line of demarcation. I got sober, and I got sober with support. And I started there's a thing for childhood abuse. You don't feel it when it happens to you. You leave your body. So there's a lot of it that's just lodged in your body and muscular tension, and you carry it around with you, and you do things so that you never feel it. Yeah. And then when you get sober, you feel it. It's called post-traumatic stress. The stress comes after, right? When I got sober and I started feeling the things I'd never felt at the time that they happened, and I was really angry. And I was also really scared for the children. They're much younger than me in my family. So it's not a secret, right? I have written and performed about these things, but I went to the cops and I did a report and I worked with social services in the town and I disclosed to everybody. And I was the fifth person to disclose. I was the fifth person to.
And nothing had happened?
And nobody, my family just would ignore because it was my aunt.
God, it's like infuriating.
It was cousins. It was our friends. And so I disclosed to all my brothers and sisters, and some of them stopped talking to me. And then it became very clear that staying sober was going to be hard if I kept in touch with these people who were still enabling. Really, you think abuse is criminal behavior. They were enabling criminal behavior in and outside the family. And so I distanced and I didn't. It took a little while and then I just dropped all contact. And then I got into theater and film. And even though I have a dead name, I have my birth name that I don't use, there was one play that had been in the news under my dead name and under my real name, my name now. And they found it and they found me. And there was a brief time of being in touch. And I found out that nothing had changed.
Oh, that's sad.
And my story with my family it's a kind of tragedy, except that I feel you can, I think, tell by the way I talk about it. It's processed. I've had decades to heal and grieve and wish I had a different family and finally come to, I had the family that I have. Mm-hmm. They made it very difficult for me to claim and be myself, and I did it anyway. And I am not going to let them be in the way ever again. That was what I decided.
I love that.
And the Sister Ann Raymond was not the only savior. I've had so much support and so much love and so much family of choice. And yeah, wherever I go, I seem to be able to find it, and I hopefully support it and create it.
Oh, I get emotional when you speak. And yes, I can absolutely tell that your the intense emotion and the pain from all of this is processed, but there's also a way in which it's totally processed, and the way that you communicate it, I can't explain it really, but it's so sincere, and maybe because it's so processed and you allow it out, but I really connect and it touches me a lot. And in your story, it's all about the pot brownies and it's giggle, giggle. And I loved the very end because it was completely unexpected for me, this turn to, we're not just getting a funny scene of pot brownies, but you're hitting in a very subtle way at the immensity of these relationships with the nuns and also the acting out, why this was going on a little bit. And I loved it. And it's cool to talk with you. And actually, maybe this is a good time to bring this part of the conversation to an end. But we do have one final question, which is, how has it been for you to revisit your story today?
I enjoyed watching it. And I was laughing at my own jokes, which was funny. And I do feel that's the best story I've told to date.
Specifically that day, or just that story in general?
That story, that day, that moment. I was the most present that I've ever been. I had the least nerves because it wasn't a competition. Mm. And I felt like I did something in that story that I had aimed to do. Because, of course, I've been telling the story of feeding pot brownies to the nuns my whole life, right? And I've told it at times are pretty inopportune, but mostly it's funny. And I was like, why tell a story that's been told before? I need to tell this story so that it's not a story I've told before. And the only way to do that is to contextualize it with more truth, right? That there is... This funny story has a very painful envelope, and it also has a very redemptive envelope. And that part of it, I feel strongly that I achieved that. Revisiting is good. Although talking about the painful context, I feel like there's I kind of want to say this to end it, that I'm as healed as I can be. I'm very proud of the way that I have handled my life. And it will always be true that I never get to be somebody it didn't happen to.
Yeah.
And so there's always a feeling of, oh, it's sad. I should be healed or unhealed. You're always going to be a little bit sad. You're always going to be a little bit angry that you don't get to be somebody it didn't happen to, that you don't get to have a life that without this stuff in it. And so that part of revisiting it is always a tweak, It's not a trauma, but it's a tweak.
that's it for this episode of What Lingers. But be sure to come back next week because, Cristian, what's next week?
Next week, we have a special bonus episode with Skye, and we're gonna have some tips about storytelling and performance on stage.
So, everyone, be sure to click follow in your podcast app so you can hear next week's episode.
And also follow us on Instagram at Storytelling Lisboa to keep up to date.
What Lingers is a podcast from the team behind Storytelling Lisboa and is produced by Johnny Bunyan. He's amazing.
Thank you so much for listening.
See you next week.